Hello everyone, and welcome back to RISEUP Books. In today's video, we will explore all the concepts and the behaviors of psychological manipulators through a summary of the book Healing from Hidden Abuse by expert Shannon Thomas. If you frequently engage with social media platforms, you'll know that psychological manipulation has been one of the most prominent phrases in 2024. Psychological manipulators can be anyone, from strangers to loved ones. They crave power, control, pleasure, and the mind games they play. So, how can you recognize if you're in a manipulative relationship? Let a survivor of psychological manipulation, and also the author of the book Healing from Hidden Abuse, psychotherapist Shannon Thomas, guide you. And let's get started right away. Psychological abuse doesn't leave visible bruises, no broken bones nor holes punched in the walls. The devastation, the deep-seated voids, take root in the survivors. And that's exactly what the abusers want. A common trait of abusers is that they always keep their hands clean, presenting that persona to the world. From the book Healing from Hidden Abuse. First, who can be a psychological abuser? They can be anyone: a narcissist, a sociopath, a father, a mother, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, adult children, co-workers, bosses, pastors, teachers, anyone around us. It's often very difficult to detect abusive behavior because it comes in many forms and characteristics. There's a misconception that abusers are mostly men, but that's not entirely true. Women can also be abusers, though their abusive behavior is often different and more carefully concealed. In a survey about the relationship between abusers and victims, the results showed, out of 603 respondents, 122 people, or 20%, said the abuser was a close family member, such as parents, siblings, grandparents, and so on. Of these 121 individuals, 87 wrote that the abuser was a family member. 41 mentions of a mother, mother-in-law, or stepmother. 27 mentions of both parents, and 8 mentions of a father. Male abusers were noted. In another study, of 433 people, 72% of the 603 participants, the abuser was often someone in a romantic relationship with them. Out of these 433, 31 identified the abuser as a boyfriend, 30 as a spouse, and 27 as a husband. How psychological abusers cause harm. First, where does manipulative behavior occur? Toxic people can be anywhere, even in the field of mental health care. Generally, abuse can be divided into two categories. First, between individuals, parents and children, romantic relationships or friendships, and so forth. Second, within a group, among family members, at the workplace, or in religious organizations. When does manipulative behavior happen? Abusers like to target individuals who have something they lack or desire. Sometimes the abuse is simply for their amusement, to boost their personal gain, to satisfy their twisted ego by hurting and destroying the victim's qualities. There are two truths about survivors that abusers particularly enjoy. First, the survivor's lack of confidence, and second, the secrets of their past experiences and growth. How does manipulation occur? Abusers often revel in power, control, pleasure, and the mind games they orchestrate. They provide false information, then quietly watch the victim make mistakes. They mock, smear, and criticize survivors for their errors. Toxic abusers also love to label survivors as selfish when they're striving for something good and healthy for themselves. Psychological abusers adamantly refuse to admit their actions harm others. A common evasion tactic they use is to play innocent or turn themselves into the victim in everyday situations. For example, friends wouldn't be that stingy with me, or a partner would never act that way. I expect more from a mature employee like you. Of course, there are many more subtle, hidden actions and words They unfold over a long period, making them hard to spot, until the survivor realizes just how much psychological manipulation they've endured. Why does manipulative behavior happen? Abusers may suffer from personality disorders, possibly due to a lack of healthy love in childhood and adolescence from their caregivers. This lack of healthy affection can stem from emotional neglect throughout childhood and teenage years. A child's material needs might be met, but indifference persists, including fake bonds among family members. The past can cause some people to stagnate, developing personality disorders, but that's not an excuse for the abusive behavior of those who choose to manipulate. There are still people raised in loveless families who remain empathetic, caring, and treat others well. The truth is, abusers perpetuate their toxic behavior by their own free will, to serve their needs, desires, demands, and expectations, to get what they want at any cost, regardless of the harm they inflict. 3 labels for victims in abusive relationships. Survivors, referring to those who have endured psychological abuse. This term is widely used in communities of people recovering from abuse, as American Heritage Dictionary defines a survivor as follows. A survivor is someone who remains alive, keeps moving forward despite difficulties and trauma, persists in normal activities, outlasts hardship, overcomes challenges, remains useful to life, copes with trauma and obstacles, and continues to persevere. The 6 stages of recovery. First, Stage 1. Despair. A person may not realize they've been abused. Some don't know what the abuser has done to them. Observable states in the early stage of an abused person. They're in chaos, anxious, hopeless, their life gradually spiraling out of control. At its worst, they may contemplate suicide. They frequently question themselves. Why can't I fix myself to keep this relationship going? Why aren't I strong enough to get through this? Why am I making everything so chaotic? They struggle with feelings of inadequacy, their emotions often deeply wounded. Some will need hospital treatment to stabilize their health and emotions. Others experience loneliness, as no one understands the intense pain raging inside them. Overall, they carry a weary, exhausted soul. Stage 2. Identification. Psychological abuse is cunning to an extraordinary degree, subtle, hidden, making it easy to misunderstand and hard to detect. Terms related to psychological abuse. Gaslighting, literally lighting the gas lamp, refers to abusers orchestrating situations to make victims doubt their memory and perception of events. The ultimate goal is to leave victims so uncertain of themselves that they hand control of their lives to the abuser. Second, smear campaign is when an abuser uses lies, gossip, or manipulative tactics like threats and isolation to turn others, or a group, against the victim. Flying monkeys, a dark metaphor, describes those surrounding the victim, enabling the abuser to carry out their dirty work intentionally or not. Fourth, narcissistic injury occurs when a narcissist, sociopath, or psychopath does something wrong and exaggerates the situation beyond reality. This is depicted when a survivor tries to point out the toxic person's mistakes. Instead of accepting criticism, abusers lash out or go silent, sometimes acting as if they couldn't care less. Gradually, everything becomes the survivor's fault for being rude, disrespectful, or upsetting them. Intermittent reinforcement is how people are brainwashed. This is described in psychological terms by American psychologist B.F. Skinner. Operant conditioning. This conditioning causes survivors to associate anxiety with the abuser's inconsistent behavior in their relationship. Intermittent reinforcement appears in relationships, workplaces, families, churches. Its experience means survivors never know whether the next interaction will be warm or gentle, scolding, provoking, or tormenting from the abuser. A short phrase describing intermittent reinforcement. An abuser doesn't abuse every day. The stages of idealization, devaluation, and discard. Idealization is when the manipulator floods the victim's world with goodness. They appear as a savior, a perfect figure, fully trusted, emotionally depended upon. This is most common in the early stages of romantic relationships. Devaluation. When the other party is at the height of love's euphoria, this is when the abuser begins psychologically and physically harming the victim. Discard. Rejecting the victim. What sets this apart from normal relationships is that survivors don't just lose the relationship. Their entire sense of self is torn apart. The abuser's discard is often vile and despicable. It leaves the victim's life chaotic and insecure, their mind and body severely damaged. Stage 3. Awakening. This stage involves a shift in the survivor's awareness after identification. It includes fleeting but clear thoughts about what they truly face. They begin to find strength to voice their feelings, setting boundaries based on their inner realizations. Stage 4. Boundaries. Building emotional distance from toxic people begins to take shape. Once healthy boundaries are established, healing and recovery can start. There's no one-size-fits-all boundary. Each survivor has their own, suited to their goals, values, and recovery. But generally, boundaries can be split into two parts. First, focused contact describes the survivor's emotional state. This is when they decide what can enter the recovery process and determine an appropriate level of connection with the toxic person. It may begin with limiting physical and emotional contact with the abuser, learning to say no to unreasonable, familiar, controlling demands. This is also the stage where survivors need to correctly understand and accept the abuser's true nature, acknowledging their behavior. No contact, cutting off all ties with the psychological abuser. No contact is the most effective way to help survivors move forward, away from toxicity. But they should note, they might be persuaded to abandon this decision. Abusers may use tactics to lure survivors back into conversation or into arguments and disputes, and during this stage, survivors might doubt the boundaries they're setting. At this point, they truly need a guide. Perhaps a steady mental health supporter to assist them, reduce their doubts, and persist in maintaining the healthy boundaries they're building. Stage 5. Restoration. This is the stage of reclaiming what's essential. Comfortable moments in life, stability in mental, physical, and financial health, any losses endured during the abuse. Survivors can enjoy vacations, relaxing trips, spend time caring for their mental and physical health, engage in healthy activities, exercise, art, restore emotional well-being and happiness, reflect, and start doing meaningful things that bring joy and fulfillment, things they couldn't do for themselves before. Stage 6. Maintenance. This is when survivors are ready to revisit earlier stages, experiencing deeper healing, allowing themselves to briefly recall positive moments with the abuser, but not dwelling on them. To maintain balance in this stage, survivors need a balanced view of their relationship with the abuser, not clinging to wounds, but not distorting the truth of the abuse. The most important thing here is realizing they are a new version of themselves, mature, changed, upgraded, giving themselves hope and faith, truly improving their life in a positive, healthy direction. Daily journal. If you were a victim in a relationship with a toxic abuser, you're on a journey of healing and recovery. Some prompts for your daily journal that might help. If the abuse occurred in a romantic relationship, friendship, workplace, or with parents, what was the most painful thing you endured? If it's ongoing in such a relationship, what's the worst memory from it? When did you realize you were entangled with a toxic person in a relationship? What were the specifics? What kept you in that toxic relationship after discovering the issue? 3 qualities you have, or had, that attract narcissists, sociopaths, or psychopaths. Detail the specific issues where the abuser began eroding your trust. What red flags in the relationship did you notice each time a problem arose? Do you have a list of boundaries set with the abuser? If setting boundaries is hard, what's the difficulty? Write about the health impacts you suffered from enduring abusive relationships. What's the hardest part of your recovery? What's the best part of your healing journey? If you could offer advice to a survivor, new to recovery, what would it be? What reward could you give yourself for achieving significant personal growth? Remember, identifying and overcoming psychological abuse always takes time to heal and recover. You and those you love may be continuously, silently, systematically abused by these perpetrators. On this journey, equip yourself with understanding, knowledge, and signs of abusers, including terms tied to abuse, like gaslighting, flying monkeys, smear campaigns, and so on. Above all, forgive yourself for not noticing the abuse sooner. Learn to overcome it, move forward, grow, and live a better life. Always remember, you deserve a better life. If you enjoyed this article, please like and share to support us. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the bell icon next to it, so you won't miss any of our future videos. Thank you for listening. This is RISEUP BOOKS.